Good afternoon. Hello, my name is Claire Palmer and I work for the Members Office of the National Maritime Museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome members and guests to this afternoon's program, Antarctic Adventures, with Tim Bowden and Tim Jarvis. This afternoon, our distinguished speakers will investigate the impulse and the extraordinary lengths adventurers went to reach the South Pole. Tim Jarvis combines a love of adventure with a passion for environmental issues, a passion demonstrated through his work as an environmental scientist, public speaker and explorer of many of the planet's most remote locations. With a master's degree in both environmental science and environmental law, he has undertaken unsupported expeditions to both polar regions and many of the world's deserts, mountains and rainforests. He recently received the Order of Australia for Community, Environment and Exploration. Please make Tim Jarvis feel welcome.
Thank you very much, Claire. Today I thought I'd talk to you about a number of the different expeditions I've done north and south and how cumulatively they've led me to plan the next expedition, which is the bid to retrace Shackleton's journey. This is the South Pole, for those of you who didn't know. The mirror ball is not there as a kind of novelty thing. The scientists who work at the South Pole base, if they wanted to get an image of the night sky, the aurora, the techno fix before they invented the fisheye lens was to take a photograph with a conventional camera into that spherical mirror and you got a curved reflected image of the night sky. It was a wonderful way of getting around it. I walked there in 47 days in 1999 on an unsupported expedition in a bid to cross the whole of the Antarctic unsupported. Unsupported in the modern definition basically means you don't use dogs or planes with resupplies of food or kites to pull you along or any of that kind of thing. You just basically are the horse pulling the cart. In the cart, in my case, was this sled. That weighed 7 kilos, but into that I put 225 kilos worth of food and fuel, communications equipment, tent, everything you need to survive in the Antarctic, and pulled it day after day. Total distance was 2,700 k's for a crossing of the Antarctic. Antarctica is about twice the size of Australia, and amazingly it's covered in an average thickness of 2,000 metres of ice. The effect of man-hauling is that despite the amount of food you consume to try and fuel your workload, you still lose weight. I lost 19 kilos despite eating 7,200 calories a day. The other thing you'll lose, if you have metal fillings in your teeth, you're constantly exposed to cold temperatures, you'll find the metal in your fillings contracts over time, enough for them to fall out. I lost 3 big fillings in the molars in the back of my mouth, and luckily or unluckily, depending on how you look at it, I had a dental kit with me and had to effect my own dental repairs. And I remember coming back to Adelaide, where I was living at the time, my dentist said, "Who did this work? You know, it's this terrible dentistry." But, you know, these are the kinds of things you need to do on the expeditions. They're the things, quite honestly. It's not the falling in the crevasse or dying in a blizzard that gets you. It's the monotony and the relentless pain and discomfort that you go through on a daily basis that winds you down and wears you down and makes you want to stop. Most of you here will be very aware of the Mawson story, but other than his having reached the South Magnetic Pole, Mawson undertook another expedition to essentially discover a section of previously uncharted coastline in Antarctica. And he was there with 2 other men, a guy called Ninnis, who was a British Army officer, and a doctor called Mertz, a Swiss doctor, and in fact he was the Swiss cross-country ski champion, I believe, at the time. So really accomplished men. And they were travelling through very heavily crevassed terrain, and the intention was that Mertz would ski at the front and he would look out for crevasses. This was going well up to the point where Mawson and Mertz regrouped to look back to see an empty scene, an empty horizon, retraced their steps and found that the sled runners led to the edge of a gaping hole, and Ninnis, the dog team, 80% of the food, the tent, Mertz's over-trousers had gone down the hole. That was the end of Ninnis. And suddenly they were in a desperate situation. They had 20% of their food left. In Mawson's words, 6 miserable dogs, because the dogs themselves had been worked very hard up to this point, and a 500-kilometre distant hut that they had almost no chance of reaching. Mertz, too, died on the return. He died about halfway back in their bid to save themselves. He died in Mawson's arms of what Mawson described as fever. Ever since the original trip, people have surmised as to what it was that had allowed Mawson to make that journey possible. Other than his incredible resolve and his physical strength and all that kind of thing, people at the time quite directly suggested that he must have had to have cannibalised Mertz in order to have made the journey. All of this put together meant that I was interested in trying to recreate this journey as closely as I can get. In other words, we weren't going to eat dogs. Dogs are not allowed in Antarctica anymore. And we weren't going to kill anyone. Well, that was the intention anyway. I got close with the film crew once or twice, but the intention was not to kill anyone on the trip. So I'm always careful to say that we got as close as we ethically could to what had happened to Mawson in recreating this trip. So I set about basically trying to, taking his diaries, recreate all of the clothes, the equipment, the sled weights they had, and do a journey of the same distance through similar terrain and see what happened, together with a guy who was going to play the role of Mertz, and he was going to heroically die at the midway point of the expedition. So I began the process of trying to get all this gear together. So first of all, we had to get the Burberry clothing. Burberry was the Gore-Tex of the time. It's not great stuff, actually, with all considerable respect to Burberry, who are one of my sponsors. They're great at making tartan-lined trench coats and handbags and things like that, but, you know, this stuff was the Gore-Tex of the day. It doesn't insulate you in terms of warmth. It does keep the wind off, but it also chafes pretty badly when you're really working hard and you're actually sweating. But nevertheless, that was the first thing we did. How do you recreate something that happened 100 years ago? You go through the whole process of replicating the gear, of course. And so the reindeer skin sleeping bags were another thing that we laboured over to get them right. And just to give you an idea, you know, not everybody makes them these days, particularly in Australia, actually. So you've got to go to an Inuit outfitter in northern Canada and say, this is what we need. They've got to cull that reindeer at the right time of year so it has the right pelt. It must have its, you know, cold winter pelt, so that the sleeping bag that gets made out of that pelt will obviously be warm enough to keep you alive in the conditions you'll face. They've got to cure it, stitch it, dry it, and then it's got to be imported into Australia, which is not easy. If you ever tried to bring a wooden bowl back from Bali, then you want to try bringing in 2 reindeer skin sleeping bags, let me tell you. As well as Ninnis falling in the crevasse and dying, along with his dog team and 80% of the food, the tent also went down the hole with him. So they were left with a tent cover. And so we copied exactly what they had. In fact, we borrowed this tent from the South Australian Museum. But it didn't have a floor, and it didn't have a frame. So we made the frame out of 2 skis, like Mawson, 2 skis and 2 old sled runners. And we stood them in a sort of pyramid configuration and draped the cover over the top and weighed down the edges with snow, and that was our tent. The effect it has is that just as the cold gets in to your sleeping bag, your body heat similarly escapes from it. And if you're lying on the snow, it does so, and it melts the snow beneath you. When that happens, of course, it makes the sleeping bag wet. So it's pretty unpleasant stuff, and it causes serious problems for things like frostbite and cold to the extremities and things like that as you're in your bag, and wounds don't heal properly and that kind of thing. Again, just to give you an idea of the gear, you know, we had the balaclavas were stitched to the original specification, woolen gloves, old glacier goggles. All of the stuff was basically faithfully replicated. Same goes with the boots. We, you know, faithfully used, they were 1930s actually, but not 1910, but they were 1930s military boots, leather hobnails. Similarly, you sweat in those and you take them off in the tent, and in minus 20 degrees, of course, they freeze. You put them on in the following morning and they're completely frozen solid. So the only way round that is to actually bring them in the wet reindeer skin sleeping bag with you, which makes it even more unpleasant inside the bag. This is the food we had, incidentally. We also replicated the starvation rations that they had. This is lard. It's the principal ingredient of pemmican. It's essentially animal fat with a bit of seasoning put into it to give it some sort of flavour. And we would have about a mobile phone size piece, perhaps the size of that, each a day. 5 boiled sweets, 1 tea bag reused morning and night, a handful of kangaroo jerky, which was our dog substitute, and you know, to go to sleep starving every single night for 45 days is very, very hard indeed. This just gives you an idea of the food. That's the pemmican, some butter, some sugar, salt, raisins, kangaroo jerky, and kangaroo jerky in 2 forms. Didn't make it any more palatable, but we ground up one and the other was in strips. These expeditions really all, including the ones in the modern era, are really all about problem solving, because you have problems with your motivation, problems with your physiological condition, you know, frostbite to digits, things like that, motivational issues, boredom issues. Suffice to say, you need to have a very philosophical attitude to problems. This was John the Russian, by the way. He was going to be Mertz. His role was going to be dropping out on day 25 or 320 Ks covered, whichever came first. He said to me, I am not sure if I become involved. And I said, well, look, your role is to die midway through. He said, I am in. It really sort of appealed to his Russian sense of fate or something. So each day really was, on these kind of expeditions, was really us trying to keep one another going. John was a real detail guy. The Russians are very good at eking out things and making them last and fixing them and, really paying attention to the detail, whereas I'm sort of a bit more interested in covering the ground as quickly as possible. So we made for a very, very good team. I was a little bit bullheaded and just wanted to rush off, and he would be the voice of reason saying, now, hold on a second, if we do that, we'll leave the tent behind or whatever. So we were a very good team in terms of supporting one another. On day 25, John did, in inverted commas, die, and he was extracted by the team of people that came in and actually filmed this and made it into a film. And I then continued on my own. And I could talk about it at great length, but again, suffice to say that suddenly all the problems you shared become problems that you yourself have to deal with, whether it's a problem with you or the tent or whatever. All in all, it was an incredible expedition. I did manage to cover the distance that Mawson covered, but in no way do I feel as though I did what he did. I just think I got as ethically close to what he had done in the modern era as is possible, as I say, without killing people and eating dogs. We didn't experience any of the kind of extreme hair loss, rafts of skin coming off the bottom of the feet that Mawson experienced in his expedition. That having been said, no sooner the dust settled and I started trying to put weight back on and that kind of thing, then Alexandra Shackleton said, now you said that, and she was on my case about doing the Shackleton journey. This is us at the boat show in London, next to the James Caird. For those of you who don't know the story, when Amundsen and Scott had made it to the South Pole, Shackleton thought, what can I do that's one better? I know, I'll go all the way across. So he sent 2 ships down, Mawson's old ship, the Aurora, to one side, and the Endurance to the other side. And of course, what happened was the Endurance was crushed in the ice. All of the men, 28 men, abandoned ship into these life rafts. There were 3 of them. This one is the James Caird. And this boat was the one that Shackleton decided he would use. It was the most seaworthy of the 3 to attempt a journey of 800 miles across the open Southern Ocean. And it was an amazing, amazing journey. They made it, they reached South Georgia. They'd left the 22 men behind on Elephant Island, and the 6 men reached South Georgia. In terms of where we're at with this expedition, National Geographic are funding a film about it. We measured up the Caird, copied it exactly, and we've made a complete replica of the boat. We've taken it to all the boat shows in the UK. It's been built on a trailer. It's allowed us to take it around. We've had gold coin donations and that kind of thing. And it's been very, very successful as a awareness raiser about the whole expedition. And this is her today. She almost looks far too seaworthy, in fact. But we have scheduled sea trials with her next year. And ironically, these days, putting my environmental hat on again, it's become more dangerous than it was back in his time, because more of the glaciers are now freer of snow than they used to be, meaning more of the crevasses that you can fall into have less snow in them. On the one hand, it makes them easier to spot, but on the other hand, it makes the fall a lot further. So it sort of swings and roundabouts a bit with that. I think the world's ready for a journey about Shackleton, because Shackleton's key message was really all about taking a very disparate group of men, as he had on his expedition, and getting them to all pull together in the same direction to achieve this seemingly insurmountable goal. And I think there's real resonance with that message in the world in which we live today, whether it's financial crisis, war on terror, or the biggest one of all, which is climate change. It's all about all of us putting aside our differences and pulling in the same direction to try and achieve the goal against these seemingly insurmountable odds. So I think the timing is right for Shackleton and his message to be brought to the fore. So I hope we get the opportunity to do the trip in 2012, and I hope you see it on TV and that none of us die. Thank you. Thanks.